What's going on, family? Inflation is at zero. Wait, no, that's our GDP. I'm Sean, and I'm joined by my co-host Damien. And today we're going to be discussing the Inflation Reduction Act, which reports to have $485 billion of new costs that'll be offset with additional revenue and savings of $790 billion implemented over a decade. So let's go ahead and get into it. Yeah, it's free. It's free money. So let's go ahead and get into it. Yeah, free. Go ahead, Dame.
Yeah, so this act that just passed went through several changes over the past couple of weeks, but now the idea is it's got several parts that are set in it. The climate change aspect of it is one of the bigger aspects, and there is going to be about over $260 billion in clean energy credits. That's really going to go to private firms, also to public utilities and individuals who are working on projects that are renewable energy, wind turbines. They're going to give you credits to offset your costs on those things to try and promote green energy production. To go along with that are some more rebates for people who want to purchase electric vehicles. There'll be a $7,500 tax credit for new vehicles and a $4,500 or $4,000 tax credit if you buy a used one. But it only applies to couples who earn less than $300,000 a year or an individual who earns less than $150,000 a year. Additional credits for solar panels in your home, or making some improvements to wiring or home insulation. So they're hoping that will save you money on your power bill. Also, incentives to cut methane emissions, $1.5 billion. And the way this is going to work is those people who are able to cut methane emissions will get rewarded, and those who fail to do it or increase methane emissions will get penalized somehow. And there's about $700 to $1.5 billion of upfront money that's going to go to them. So whether or not they'll actually do reductions, you never know, but they're going to get the money up front. The next thing is a $27 billion for what they're calling a green bank. This is essentially a private-public cooperative. Many people have heard that you can invest in funds that are green funds. Okay, you can buy green stock. Well, this is essentially if people and private sector got together to make money available to invest in green projects. So you would go and you would take a loan out from this bank, and this would be $27 billion of government money going in there to supplement what's already in there. How that works, it's not really clear.
Wait, so you're saying there's going to be money in the hopes of turning a profit or making somebody 4 or 5x on some program that has gray areas and we don't understand?
Yeah, so basically what they have found for people who have studied these green banks, it's kind of interesting. When you put public money in, you get 6 to 20 times more dollars in private investment, right? So in other words, if I open a green bank, I'm only going to spend X amount of money fixing the environment. But if the government helps, I'm more than happy to spend 20 times as much to help these projects. So it could be a scam. I think this will be something that will be looked at in the long term. I don't even understand how you access the money, but if people just Google the concept of green banks, there are several around the world, and they're very complicated structurally. But again, the idea is you've got investors, private investors who have certain outcomes they'd like to see, just as private investors in real estate or anything else. And now there's public money in there, and hopefully they can help guide what money is lent to what types of projects. And, if hydrogen's the new thing, then they'll push hydrogen and lend money to those projects. So that's kind of what it is. The next two items sound completely opposite to climate change and to what this bill was supposed to be about. And they are a result of the power of Joe Manchin, the Democratic senator from West Virginia. There is going to be increased investment in drilling, offshore drilling in Gulf of Mexico for oil and in Alaska. And these are things that Democrats have sort of been against. They've been supposedly against, drilling in these areas that are environmentally sensitive. But now they're going to throw money at it. And so, the bill starts with climate change and trying to reduce that while throwing a bunch of money at pumping oil out of the ground. Sort of a smaller thing is that is kind of interesting is Joe Manchin received money, permanent funding for people with black lung. There are about 25,000 coal miners in the country who are currently suffering a black lung disease, and their health will be permanently taken care of. Compare this with what we're going to talk about in a minute in terms of healthcare for the general population. There's additional money for agriculture and ports, $6 billion to reduce emissions in chemical and cement and steel plants, $3 billion to reduce air pollution at ports. I'm not sure what that is exactly. Those things are going to start within the next year. So that's funding that's going to be available very quickly. How are we going to pay for it? The idea is taxes, okay? Right now, there's a corporate tax of about 20%, 21%. The bill is going to reduce that to a 15% corporate minimum tax. Many people have heard this argument that there were a lot of corporations that pay no taxes every year, okay? And they're talking about maybe income taxes or taxes on their profits. They do pay employment taxes and other things. So the idea here is they're going to mandate a minimum tax of 15%. However, if you read the details, these companies are still allowed to use all the deductions that they can qualify for. So there may still be some who don't pay any tax if they're getting the deductions, okay? Also, they're getting climate tax credits if they qualify. How are we going to collect these taxes? Well, they're going to hire another 85,000 people to work at the IRS. I don't know why they need that many people, but they believe it will help enforcement of these corporations. The odd thing about that is if it's just billionaires and millionaires who are evading taxes, you wouldn't need 85,000 people to go after them. Most people suspect that what this is really about is what the Democrats and other people have been talking about for the past couple of years, going after taxes on transactions like Venmo, going after rideshare, going after crypto purchases. So that's what they really think it's going to be. That's something people can look into themselves. There's going to be another tax on share buybacks. Many people have heard about how companies will buy back their stocks. It's seen as a kind of corrupt thing. When President Trump was in office, there was a tax bill that was passed, and it enabled companies to do some buybacks. So some of the biggest drug companies in the world bought 75 billion of their own stock back, but then they spent about 72 billion on research. So it's not quite clear that this will have any effect, because if they're going to be taxed on it, it'll be a 1% tax. Will they actually bother with buybacks at all, or just find some other way to strengthen their stock? When Biden ran for office, there were two main things that the Democrats talked about, two big promises. And one was lowering drug prices and making healthcare more affordable. So in this bill, they are giving Medicare something people have wanted for years, the ability to negotiate drug prices. They buy a lot, they should be able to get a deal. The problem is it all depends on what drugs they're going to allow to negotiate. What they decided is they're going to start with a trial number of drugs, but they haven't told us what those are going to be. They're going to figure that out. It makes a big difference, right? If it's not insulin, if it's not one of the drugs or one of the top drugs that most Americans use, then you're not really going to be saving a lot of money, and it's not going to impact people. The other problem with this is it doesn't go into effect right away. So people who are desperate for reductions in their drug costs are not going to get the relief immediately. It also allows them to change these drugs over time. And I think that's going to be a problem when people find out the actual what's really in the bill. Another big issue here is whether this is going to reduce the deficit, right? Original versions of this bill had $300 billion of deficit reduction. Well, to reduce the deficit, you got to stop spending money. That didn't happen. So instead, this is kind of a compromise. There were increased costs, but if you assume that there's going to be increased revenue and savings, then it does look like the bill is going to save money and cut costs in the long term. Let's talk about what's not in the bill. I talked a bit about the prescription issues, but climate. They really didn't do as much on emissions cuts as they're saying. They really didn't deploy new clean energy technologies. Instead, they're giving rebates and discounts if someone else kind of does it. That's a little odd, particularly considering that they are creating a situation where they're incentivizing people to buy electric vehicles, and we're not building the infrastructure to charge those things. The taxes. Senator Elizabeth Warren and Senator Bernie Sanders wanted more power on the tax front, okay? Something stronger that you couldn't get around. They didn't get close to it, okay? So they dropped a lot of tax, going after tax loopholes. They didn't even get near that. So some people will be unhappy. The healthcare thing, I think, will probably be the long-term frustration of this. This has been a priority for this party. You know, they've talked about healthcare and cutting healthcare costs forever. They've talked about expanding Medicare, but here's what they didn't do. They did not expand Medicare to more people. There's no increase there's nothing for childcare, nothing for elder care, nothing for housing, nothing for paid leave. So a lot of people are not going to be really affected by this. You know, it looks like a big giveaway to the very same corporations that many in Washington criticize all the time. It looks like a really big giveaway. So much so that Senator Bernie Sanders, even though I think he ended up voting for the bill, was very, very frustrated by what the outcome was. And then finally, just the title. I don't really understand why it's called the Inflation Reduction Act, because it doesn't do anything to reduce prices at the store, prices at the pump, prices that are, you know, look like they're going to increase for Americans over the next maybe year or so. So there's a lot in this bill. This chart that is from the Committee of Responsible Federal Budget will show you some of the final numbers that were in the bill, and you can see the credits and how they break down. And you can see the math that is in the bill. Now, of course, this considers that nothing else is going to happen. This bill is being sold as a big win for the president, and seeing as something that they want to get delivered prior to the upcoming election. And there's a lot that they can campaign on. But the details matter. And I'm not sure exactly how this really is reduction in inflation, reduction in spending, reduction in deficit. And there are some scary parts. Just really quickly going back to the tax issue. Someone from the administration, I've forgotten the name, but was questioned the other day about whether or not he could guarantee that these additional tax hires for the IRS were not going to go after people in the middle class or gig workers. And he flat out said he cannot guarantee that. And when you go back and look at drafts of this bill and you read things that were said by people like Elizabeth Warren, and even though the Republicans are kind of probably overselling this, it is pretty reasonable to expect that transactions through your phone, a lot of easy ways to pay, particularly over $600 transactions, are going to be subject to tax. So these are things people are going to have to look at and be aware of. And that's kind of just a quick rundown of it.
Yeah. I just really want to leave people with, when you have such a large debt burden as we do, there's only two ways to get rid of that debt burden. You either inflate it away or you raise taxes. You find some additional money to throw at that debt. And Dame, I do want to correct you because you said the Inflation Reduction Act isn't reducing inflation, but inflation's at zero, right? So,
I'm sorry. Yes. So, the other day, and President Biden did come out and say that inflation is at zero. What he meant, I think, was that inflation overall has not risen from June to July. However, that's misleading because, yes, the prices actually, and it's actually a little scary because the price of gas went down, but inflation didn't change, which means something else or a lot of things had to go up to keep it at zero. And the projections actually for where inflation would be had zero in its range. So, it didn't go negative. It just stayed the same. So if Americans were struggling paying gas, well, now maybe they're struggling paying food. And that was I understand why he said that, because he is trying, obviously, to capitalize on this bill and what they're selling as a strong economy for the jobs and all of those things. So I understand why he did it. But for people who have been watching inflation and watching how people are really being hurt with their paycheck and how far it goes, it came off as a bit tone deaf.
Right. Well, hopefully we do find out that was peak inflation and maybe things do stabilize or come down. I do know that you are correct. The food prices went up. Some of the energy prices went down. Housing prices, as far as renting, that went up because, of course, when you sign a lease, that's for a year, 6 months. So who knows? We'll just have to kind of keep track. And, these things can change so rapidly depending on what's going on in the world or any bottlenecks or coming up in the future. But, hopefully things do come down and start to stabilize and start to reduce this burden that the middle class is feeling on them. Did you want to leave them with anything else, Dan, before we get out of here?
I think what I expected this week was that this bill would be more in the news because the prior week there was a lot of hype about, hey, they've got Joe Manchin on board and Kristen Sinema. She's a Democrat from Arizona who it seems to be more conservative when it comes to corporate tax and things of that nature. So you really had every Democrat on board, and it just was for the president's signature. But somehow this week, it really didn't get sold well. And it may say something about where Americans' heads are, that they were really hoping for something a lot simpler and a little more concrete that they can hold in their hands. And so what it may suggest, and some people are already talking about this, is between now and perhaps the elections, there could be something else, student loan reduction or some type of stimulus check, and is inflation. So I think it'll be interesting to watch over the next few months whether this is a boon to the hopes of the Democrats or has no effect at all. That'll just be interesting politically.
Yeah, we'll just wait and see and allow our audience to make up their own minds. We appreciate y'all, and we'll catch you on the next video. Take care.